I was talking to Collins about a potential webinar, and it came to me that there was a vast range of resources out there, and particularly poignant to international schools was the fact that we have such a transient body of children coming through, and not just the case of children coming and going at any particular time, but also that children come to international schools with a different understanding and a different level. um, as Bethan mentioned earlier on, I've taught in Kenya and Thailand, China and Hong Kong, designed and built schools. But because I've been at the beginning of many projects at schools, I've had to integrate new reading schemes and bring in the resources from scratch. And so I brought in Big Cat from new into two schools and ran it parallel next to an existing reading scheme in a school in China. So when we have our learners come into our classes, coming from different standpoints or coming from the same standpoint, it's about how they learn to read. So learning to read differs greatly with children. It depends how much immersion in reading they've had from the beginning. They're immersed in text around them. They're immersed in text on their toys. They're around their immersed in text in the streets and shop signs. Everything around them is text driven. And so very quickly, children notice and recognize what words mean. So immediately children will know the word no, very simple, two letters in the word, but they quickly associate that when they see it around them. Things like the word stop. There was a study that said that there are four prominent words: hi, yes, no, and stop were the four top words that children recognize before they can actually read. Different languages, though, have different ways of learning to read. When you consider, in China, for instance, having to learn the radicals in a particular order to create a character. In England, we learn phonetically. The Finnish language is a simple syllabic structure, whereas English has a very, very complex structure with special rules for the different sounds of different letters. So anyone teaching phonics will understand that you have your special rules for different words, which makes teaching English very difficult. It also makes learning to read very difficult. It says there that more than a third of Finnish children are already reading before they start school. They start school at 7 in Finland, and they've already learned to read before they get there. Their language is easier to apply than English, but that's not the only reason that they can read. They have a very, very attentive parent body, and they have a very clear structure upon reading in public libraries, etc. It's a very supportive country. Phonic understanding with us in English is the systematic way to teaching phonics. We teach it throughout the British system. We try to apply this in other languages when teaching foreign languages to English in British international schools, which doesn't always work. Phonemes represent the sounds in the language. So sorry, I know that I'm preaching to converted here, but the way that phonics breaks down words into simple units helps us to create the text and create the sounds for the students to read. So this allows children to decode all the writings there, to decode all the text, but it doesn't then lead on to inference, which is something that we need to teach later on as teachers, and we need to further down the road, we need to make sure that we're building inference skills around that. It also allows the reading and spelling of unfamiliar words. So you can say to, for instance, my daughter, you can say to her, friends, and how do you spell friends? And she can start to sound it out. She can then apply any spelling rules or special friends, as she calls them, into her sounding out of the words. But you can say the cat, how do you spell it? They don't know it. They can sound out cat and write it down. But it's very, very complex unless the children know the phonic rules, like the special friends, where certain letters go together to make a sound. So my daughter's come back recently and said she's learning the ow sound, so the o sound, and I said, is that oh? She said, no, it's the o. I said, is that oh, huh? And she went, no, it's ou. Ou, as in the ow sounds are ow, ow, bow, so, bow. And I was like, oh, well, okay, yeah, because that would be so, not sow. or it's not so. So she's learning different grammatical phonic rules and how to apply them. She has to memorize those. They're not simple decoding. She has to memorize her simple phonic rules that she learns in class. And she calls them special friends. In other schools, they have different names for them. But it's about how children decode and remember how to decode those rules. Then we have segmenting and blending, where the children are putting together and blending up those words. So the word can be broken down into its simple form and then reconstructed. So they sound them out in order, and they merge the sounds to make the word. So you have cat, 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 cat. So you get it slowly from the Preston boards, or blending them all together to make the sound until they hear a recognizable word. And sometimes that's difficult. Some children can hear the sounds, but they can't actually blend them together. And that's a long process for some children, but some children get it very quickly. But this is the killer for international schools, is that when children are introduced to reading, because as I've said, they're all immersed in language around them, in their homes, in the world. But when they're actually officially introduced to it in a school environment, so we all know that younger children soak up a language much more quicker than older children. I think the official cutoff for the maximum retention of language, or retention of known language and absorption of new language, is about 12 or 13. But when they're really, really young, they don't grasp the alphabet in principle. They simply understand the printed words and they can decode it using their phonics. As they get a bit older, we start to see high frequency words, or CVC words, and they can start to recognize words by sight without having to decode them, which is when reading becomes more fluent. Instead of having to decode every word and reading being very stagnated, it starts to get more flow as they recognize the words. But when are they officially introduced to reading? Well, as you all know, it differs greatly across the world. So we've got the very earliest, France and Hungary, etc., start reading from the age of 3. So they begin school, but that's when phonics, or introduction to reading, actually begins. And it goes all the way up systematically: England to 4, Australia, Greece, etc., and China is 5, all the way up to Sweden and the Scandinavian countries starting at 7. But as I said, 7 isn't a definite indicator of when they've started to read, because by the time they get to school, a lot of them can read already through parental input. So let me go back. So if that could be a typical cohort in your class, that you have a percentage in your class in an international school who are from France or Korea or from the Netherlands, and you have, say, 50% are from England or from Australia, and then you have a few children who are Scandinavian, your range of where those children's starting points are coming from differ greatly. So you have children who have got no reading experience, and you have children who have been learning to read for 4 years. So if we take a typical year 3 class, they're 7 years old. You have a Scandinavian child coming in who's never been to school, and you have a child coming from France who's been in school for 4 years. So the diversity of the levels of comprehension and their reading fluency should be great. Like I said, with parental input, it might not be that great, but it would be in their home language. So they're all going to be starting a language from scratch anyway. So with that diversity of levels, finding the right reading book is an essential part, because you need to personalize that experience. You can't set the children age appropriate work, because they're coming at such different standpoints. So the work has to be targeted at their individual level. So you need to introduce children to new vocabulary, you need to gain their attention, and you need to pressure without destroying their self-esteem so that you turn them off reading altogether. So you need to have a range of materials that can support that development in your children. So you need to match the books that you've got available to you to your particular class. So that might mean that you have in your class an entire range. If it was Big Cat, you would have right from the beginning and right to the end for fluent or free readers. So the resources you have to are vitally important. If you have a very narrow range of books, you can't cater for the very new to English learners, and you can't cater for the very proficient readers, the free readers. And you really want to push those to make sure that they start to have a love of reading, and they don't get switched off it by books that are below their level and don't amuse them or engage them. What we're trying to do is to engage children from each end of the spectrum to make sure that they can flourish and they can develop, and that they or when you say the word, it's right, we're going to have 10 minutes reading time, it's not get your books out and let's see how many pencils I can sharpen, or if now's the time to go and ask to go to the toilet. You want the children to be absolutely, yes, it's reading time, I want to read. You want the children to feel that feeling that adults have when you have a book that you just can't put down. You want the children to feel that love of reading, that they can't wait to bury themselves in it. You don't want the books to be out of their range so that they feel that they're too challenging or they feel that they're boring, because that would crush confidence, and that would also bring apathy with children, so that you don't want them to be lethargic as far as reading goes. You don't want to hate it and turn them off, because then that class becomes disruptive, because they're not engaged and they're not focused, they're not as we say, entertained. They're not entertained by a book, they want to be sharpening pencils or going to the toilet, etc. So this is from a study that was conducted in 1999. Quality literature is highly motivating for both students and teachers. Students prefer to learn with these texts, and are given the opportunity will choose these texts over traditional readers. So traditional readers is back in my day of the Kathy and Mark and the awful books where it was just repetitive, and it built slowly on repetitive language. You had the same characters and you had repetitive language, and a new bit of information was added in each different level book. It was monotone, it was boring, and it was a process. You knew the only positive to reading that text was so that I can achieve the next level. And the only thing to look forward to about achieving the next level is I'd gone up in my head, self-esteem wise, but all I was, lucky to get was another book of the same monotonous rubbish, but with a couple of new extra words. So the range of books and the range of content is hugely important. Now, this is the range of Big Cat that's there. So you've got fiction, you've got non-fiction, you've got phonics support, you've got phonics progress, you've got phonics practice. As far as readers goes, you've got guided reading sets, so you can share that guided reading experience with the class. But for this particular range that I brought into the school, I brought it in because we had a cohort of boys who were able readers, but were very reluctant to read because they were bored. Collins addressed that with non-fiction books, books on topics like transport and sports and sporting heroes. Collins also addressed the fact that we had very proficient readers, but no inference skills. And Phonics addresses that with their teacher activity books, so that you build inference skills in the questions you ask and the way that you approach the reading tasks. So for instance, when a child finishes a reading book, there are questions on that book that you can ask the child to understand, to assess their understanding of the text. So whether their inference skills have been built, their inference skills are solid, or if they've just surface read the entire book. And yes, they can tell you the names of the characters, but they can't tell you what Christian Bishop was trying to do when he's walking down the road, and why he threw the peach at Bethany. Bethany, they can't tell you that information. They can simply read it. So the range of books will actually ensure that you build on those areas that you want to focus on, as in reluctant readers or inference skills, etc. The phonics books are particularly good because they, so long as it's in tandem with your phonics scheme that you run at school, they build upon the lessons that the teacher teaches. So the teacher teaches a phonics lesson to the whole class, and then when the child goes back to their sequence in their reading book, it then helps to encourage the same phonic patterns that they're seeing. And the books can obviously be selected to match the phonic pattern that you're teaching at the time. So differentiation is massively important because it caters for the individual. Okay, so the individual learning needs. And as I said, it could be a learning need as in they need to be pushed in a particular area. It could be that they need to gain their phonics. It could be that it's their inference. It could just be that they are not enjoying reading and you want to find something new and stimulating. But differentiating by tasks, so setting them in the right book, is hugely important. So in a class of international students, like I said, who have had a varying range of entry point, 3 years old to 7 years old, we need to use differentiation as the crux of everything we do, to make sure that we're addressing those needs from every angle for all the children. We need to cater the books that we give out and the books and how they progress through those books to make sure that we're matching their progress. We don't want to stifle any progress, but at the same time, we don't want to push too hard until they're ready to go to the next book. So having that range is massively important, that you can take the children slowly through and you can see the progression and see how competent they're becoming. Research in literacy reminds us that learning material mustn't be too difficult to frustrate, and it mustn't be too easy to bring lethargy. It's like that, the classic diagram of going up to the corner to being in flow. It's not too challenging, it's not too easy, so it's just the perfect mix. I'm trying to think of the name of it now, but it'll come to me. So using a different approach to text gives the zone of proximal development. That's it. Using a differentiated approach to text gives children, allows them to get the precise level of their book, to really enhance their development, to really make sure that we're maximizing the flow of the children through those levels. But they've got the right amount of inference skills, the right amount of vocabulary recognition and understanding before they progress on to the next one. So a whole school reading program ensures that there's a level for everybody, right from the new readers' introduction to text. So they have books with no words, for instance, for the children to start trying to predict the story as it goes through, and maybe trying to sound out one or two words at the beginning, to all the way to free readers, where you've got fiction and non-fiction books, which are very complex as far as year 6 primary children go. But the variety of topics, as I said, in the Big Cat range is what drew me to it over and over again. The texts are engaging. The illustrations for the non-fiction, for the fiction books is very good. For the non-fiction books, the diagrams and the pictures are hugely engaging for the students. It's informative. They're all structured in a classic sort of non-fiction information book way, so that you can again reinforce your teaching of non-fiction texts in the books that they've actually got to themselves. When in international schools, we teach guided reading, and I'm sure that you teach that in your schools. And guided reading is a pivotal part of a group of children at the same level sharing a text and digging down deeper into a text to make sure that they understand and they get the maximum benefit from that text. It's a cyclical process, so it's a case of, you have a discussion before the reading about what the book might be about, what the title tells us, what the blurb tells us, what are our predictions from the story. Then we have independent reading, where we may ask the children to independently read quietly, or we might share the reading around the group. But everyone is reading at the same pace together. Everyone is sharing it, and any unknown vocabulary can be raised, and everybody gets the same understanding of what that verb, what that word, or what that sentence means. Or if there are any, the author has put in any structures or techniques in there that they might be learning about in class, they can be highlighted too. And then you have a discussion after reading about what we've read, what was the author's intention, what do we think the character's doing, and a shared understanding of what the text has told us. So the main goal of guided reading is to make sure that the children are developing their reading strategies whilst reading for meaning independently. So you can then set them off a task and say, right, well, I want you all to go and read chapter 6 on your own, and then come back, and then you start that initial discussion again. So what did you think from chapter 6? What did you think it meant? What did you think the character was going to do next? Did you expect the character to do that? How has that affected the storyline? These are all discussions you can have in the group. So in a nutshell, guided reading allows teachers to meet the varying instructional needs of all children in the class by taking a group of similarly level children and sharing the text, but also developing their reading and understanding of the text, instead of just simply sitting them on their own with a text to hammer through it on their own. Now, what Big Cat brought with this was the guided reading handbooks, which are massively important for getting the maximum benefit from the books and the scheme that you've got. The each set of books for guided reading have got the handbook there. They give key questions, they give key activities, and they've got assessment support as well. So that you can, with any particular set of children, cohort children, you can assess their acquisition of language, you can assess their progress through the levels, and you can assess their inference skills. These aren't a standalone assessment, so you can build them into your current assessment program. But this is a very informative tool for just individual class teachers, for you to progress, for you to understand how the children are progressing, and to assess where the children need to go next with their reading, what sort of text they've had a lot of. If they've had a lot of experience of fiction, it gives you the opportunity to expose them to more non-fiction. There's a vocabulary boost session in each one, which again will take a particular word from the text and ask the children to come up with different words for that word, but also ask them then to maybe go and look up alternatives in the thesaurus. So again, it's building and building and building vocabulary and extending the children in their learning. It's got resource packs which you can download, and extension sessions from Sapphire, which is at the top end to challenge really strong readers. So it's not just a lower end resource tool, it goes all the way through the reading scheme. So the teachers provide specific guidance for a specific text at a specific year level, I'd imagine, sort of across two or 3 year groups. But the key for us is, if we've got children coming in with such a varying range of reading ability, is how to access the teacher books and the teacher resources and the activities to manipulate those to fit the learners that are into that level. Okay. So the books actually ensure that they have appropriate challenge and vocabulary and develop their understanding, but they also demonstrate, it gives ways for the children to demonstrate their understanding of a text. But this might be aimed at, let me say, a year 4 class. So how do we manipulate that activity to an older child in year 6, for instance? Or how do we manipulate this task for year 4 for a year 1 child who's a proficient reader? So during this webinar, I'm going to try to explain and try and give some examples of how we can manipulate the ideas in the teacher books to cater for the different levels in our class. So this is a year 6 child, and they're at a year 1 material level. So the Magic Pen is a book aimed at it's a green book. There's green A and green B, and it's aimed at early year 1, sort of Red's early year 1, mid-term 2, I'd imagine, for year 1. So all the Big Cat books have key vocabulary and discussions, okay, about how to develop their language and understanding. The top bit there is a direct copy from the book, okay, which is skills focus. That's still applicable. But here I've put, so the session on the right is a guided reading session. Okay, and that's going to still be applicable to a year 6 child. They're going through it and sounding out, because although the text is earlier, the activities can still be applicable to a year 6 child, because they're still having to learn how to sound out and blend the words Magic Pen. But for the older children, and to demonstrate their oral knowledge, because they might have a greater understanding orally, because they've been exposed to that environment, but not written, and not to be able to read it. So you could get them to select simple words from the text and suggest alternatives and place them into a sentence. So the word from the text is big. So you could say, right, well, what's another word for big? Gigantic. Okay, well, give me an example sentence. And they can give you a sentence, and then you can ask for another word and you can extend it. But this is tapping into their vocabulary without going back to a simple level book, because their reading level is there. You can use their tacit knowledge of the books, and you can use their vocabulary that they have in their heads to extend it, and for them to demonstrate further their vocabulary they know. And I've put 3 examples there: big, bright, smile. But these are all activities that you can get from the text and how you can apply it to a year 1 book. So even though the book is at a simpler level, the activities that you can do can push and progress them on. Like I said, the guided reading activities, they begin at the tune-in session there with sounding out Magic Pen. Then there are questions in the text which again are relevant. So why do you think Mr. Big had a big house? What could we call Mr. Big's house? If it had a name of a house, it could be called Gigantic Hall. It could be called Huge Mansion. You could extend it to the learners that you have. And then again, you've got to wrap up there, and it then starts to predict. You head into asking predictive questions where you're asking them to project what might happen in the story, or project what they think, what type of voice would he have. In your head, you've pictured this person. What sort of voice does he have? And what sort of voice does that character make? What sort of characteristics do they have? And again, that's building inference skills, as well as building vocabulary and understanding of a text. It's building up that inference that they have from the text and their own magical picture making in their head of the story and of the characters. So here we've got a child. So this is the typical Scandinavian. This is an example from my actual teaching experience in Beijing, actually. A year 3 child come from Finland. No reading, no writing, very good spoken vocabulary, but no reading or writing ability whatsoever. So you've got Mapman there. So you can show these are objects, simple 3-letter words that you could try and start to build app. So again, it's red level. This is pink, I think. Pink level is right at the beginning. So you can show the children some different objects: a pin, a map, a man, a mat, pan, and tap. And you want to get them to identify objects. But when instead of saying that's a pin, trying to focus on sounding it out. So put in app. So although their known vocabulary is very good, they've never gone through the process of breaking that down, segmenting, and then blending it into back to be a word again. So it's trying to reverse their understanding as far as their mental understanding goes, and to apply it into their phonic understanding, which is zip. So you're then asking the children to write. So they've sounded it out in their head, put it in there, and now write it down. And they can start to get letter formation if they've never written in English. They can have letter mats and word mats around them to help them to form the letters properly. And then you can ask them to find images and text from within the book itself that have a similar sound. What else starts with a p, p, p? And they can go through the book and look for the familiar letter or familiar sound when they notice the words. You can have partner talk, talk partners about superheroes. What superheroes have you heard of? What would if you were going to be a superhero, what would you be? And again, you're taking that enthusiasm of a year 3 child, but you're still applying it to the text which is about Mapman. If you're looking at vocabulary extension, you can ask children what they would do if they were a superhero, what powers you like to have, which one would you be? You can help the children extend their ideas using because or so they can start to write simple sentences. I would like to fly because then I can be anywhere in the world. Or I would like to have X-ray vision so then I can see through walls, etc., etc. But again, the tasks that you set are all based around that original text, but you're not dumbing down an activity for them. The activity is still at their age appropriate level. It's just the text is at their appropriate level for their phonic development. So year 1 child accessing, this is the year 5-6 book. So in a guided reading session, you could just look at, again, front cover discussion and blurb discussion. What sort of book do you think it is? Fiction, non-fiction? Who's the author? Look at the back of the book. What's the blurb? What do we think this is a story about? What do you think is going to happen? Do you know any other books by this author? Do you think it's going to be a funny book, a sad book? Do you think it's going to be, what do you think is going to happen to the character? And then again, what have you heard? Have you heard the word bungle before? Are there any alternatives? Do you know any other words that mean the same sort of thing as bungle? And they can, again, thesaurus work, or they can draw on their own vocabulary. With year 1, they're going to have less extended vocabulary to rely on, so more exposure to thesauruses is going to be handy for them to have to make sure that they build that knowledge in their heads. And what does this lead you to infer about him? Why is he called Bungle Man? What's it going to lead you to understand about him? What are you expecting to see him do when you read this book? So again, that's inference skills, but still at the age appropriate level of a year 1. Then you've got some specific examples from the text. This is these questions on the right hand side, the top half there are some questions from the book, which you can still apply to a year one child. Talk to your reading partner about a lie that someone told. Can you make a timeline to show what's happened? And again, that's understanding of the chronology of the text. And then look at some of the words the authors used, and can you explain what it means? Can you put it in a sentence? So, and can you define it? This is really pushing on and building their language acquisition. And you've got questions that you can ask either before they go into an activity with a partner, or you can just do the activity themselves, or do it afterwards. You've got a reading journal, or you've got a reading reflection, or a reading diary, or whatever. Ask the children to reflect and to write down key questions, because as they get that bank, the parents are also seeing how the child is being pushed, and will get an idea of what questions to ask and how you are probing the children at school, so that they would get an example of what to do at home with their child. If we look at further proficiency, once the children's reached a high level of proficiency, it's really on sort of year 6 upwards. It's all about comprehension and inference. So year 5, 6 books are really more question based about the content they've just read. So you've got, here's an example from one of the books there, and you've got reading objectives, communication and language objectives. There are curriculum links, high frequency words, and some interest words, which you can link to. For instance, the interest words there are all linked to diet, and you could try and ask the children to apply those diet words into what the food groups are, etc. You could really build it into your other key areas of learning to get cross-curricular learning going on there. You've got name the meals of the day, put them in order, look at the front cover, identify pictures and creatures, and what do they know about these creatures. So you're building upon the text as a cornerstone of further learning, but without looking at individual vocabulary, individual words, and breaking them down phonetic like you did at the beginning. But again, this is still applicable to all the different year groups, because you're asking questions that are specific to the text, or to questions about images that are in the text, and you're extending that knowledge slowly, putting on brick on the wall. So this is an overview chart of where they go from the books. So right at the beginning, you start at lilac, and then you go up through the pinks and the reds. So the lilac is your phonic introduction. These are your new beginners, new to reading, and they grow up as far as sort of red. The red books are at sort of year 1 level. Red, yellow, and blue kind of cover year 1 really, and year 2 you should be looking at sort of orange and turquoise by about year 3, possibly children on white and gold and lime in sort of year 3 or 4, and it goes all the way up to pearl. And then once you've got to pearl, the amount of input that you need to give a child for inference should have been built progressively. So if you're giving phonic input as far as lilac goes, then you're starting to build slowly upon phonic, word recognition. And then once you've got word recognition, then it's starting to build in sentence structure. Once you've got that, you're starting to build in questioning and inference. And then you're starting to then project about what might happen in the story, project about, the character analysis of what a character might sound like, or a character might move like, and all the way towards developing that love of reading. So by the time the children have reached pearl and diamond level, they should be able to access a normal novel book, or free reader book as they're called in a lot of schools, happily and easily. So they should be able to read something like a Roald Dahl book, for instance, and have full understanding and full appreciation of the text, and also of the author's intentions and the grammatical structure of the book. So in an international setting, it's vital for us to select appropriate texts where children for children in their reading development, not on the age of the year group, because like I said, year 3 could have a child entering it with no experience of reading at all, and a child who's been reading for 4 years. By having a diverse range of the big cat books, etc., you're making sure that you have a book for every student. You have a book for those who are brand new to English, to all the way to proficient readers. But what you're also doing as you work through this, the reading scheme, the book bands, is that you're ensuring that we're building the structure properly. We're building it from phonics at the bottom. And when we've got the keys to decode and segment and blend the words, then we're starting to build sentence structure. Then we're starting to build vocabulary knowledge. Then we're starting to build inference. So you're slowly building upon each step towards proficiency and towards a love of reading. So, to summarize, a good banded scheme, and there are lots and lots out there. Thankfully, no Kathy and Mark, that's gone now. A good banded scheme allows for differentiated instruction at an individual level for everybody in your class. You should be able to put your hands on a book for whatever level comes into your class, be it year 1 all the way up to year 6. But you as a teacher are the key, because you hold the keys to those books. And instead of simply giving them an age appropriate book, you have the range at your fingertips. So you have the ability to pick a book and give it to a child to make sure it's at their level to gain maximum progress and proficiency in reading. You meet each child where they are so that you can move them forward. And with the assessment tools, you can ensure that progress isn't stifled. You can also ensure that the children are not skipping through the levels too quickly without building the inference skills with the assessment tools. So you can make sure that you go back and check understanding, check inference, check vocabulary before progressing them up a coloured reading band. So it makes sure that the child is fully ready to progress and you've got the appropriate book for them at that particular level. So a good reading scheme allows an opportunity for sharing the pleasure of reading with children, and it motivates children to become more interested in an activity. And that's what we want to do. I was so confident with Big Cat once I'd moved into my last school in Thailand that I'd got Big Cat in while we were still in the design phase of the school. And I designed a library with a reading cave, and the children had to go in with head torches, because it was meant to represent when we all used to get under the covers at night. When Mum said turn the light off, you went under the covers with a torch to read, to carry on reading, because you loved reading so much. And to represent that experience at school, I put a reading cave to try and encourage that love of reading. And luckily, the library became the central point of the school, because children did love reading. And they've only got that love of reading from that introduction, a proper introduction to a guided read, a set of reading, but a banded reading scheme that was accessible to every level, but had books of such a variety that it would meet the needs and interests of everybody that read a book, to make sure that those children could flourish and enjoy and build that love of reading. If they'd have had Kathy and Mark, I'm sure that we wouldn't have had such attrition as far as the reading levels went, but we did, and it's still quite exceptionally high levels of reading proficiency in the school. There is time for questions, and I would just highlight here that you can email the Collins team at any point. There's social media links and Facebook links. You can sign up for a newsletter, or as Bethany just mentioned earlier on, you can sign up for a copy of these slides from the webinar. And there's a QR code there, but I'm sure that Bethany would be able to better explain what the QR code takes you to. But I will take any questions, so if anyone wants to fire away with anything, please do. As I said, I'm not trying to teach Granny to suck eggs, so I'm not a reception expert. I don't spend my whole life in reception, but I have been in international schools for 22 years. So I do understand the diversity that faces our schools. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Okay. So on to the questions. So we've had one that's come through from Jamie, I believe, and it's: what are your thoughts about asking a child to make a picture or graphic from the sentences of a reading paragraph? Now, Jamie went on to then explain, can you take the pictures that are in the books and ask them questions about it to kind of understand their comprehension or their inference from that actual book?
So just to clarify, are we talking about the child drawing a picture?
I think it was an either or thing. I think it was maybe asking the child to draw from sentences or the pictures themselves that are there.
Right, I completely understand. So, if you have a reluctant child to write or to talk, for instance, there was a little girl that I taught who, for the first 6 weeks, I mean, this is a long time ago, but 6 weeks she wouldn't speak to me at all. So to ascertain her understanding of reading was very difficult, and she was a very good reader. So asking her to draw her perception of something that's in it, but perfect. Any evidence that that child can present as evidence of understanding of what they've read, perfect. um, if she won't write for you, she won't tell you. If she won't write it, a picture is perfect, because a picture tells 1,000 words. As long as they can draw what's actually happening, that's fine. As far as inferring, what was the bit about inferring from a picture?
I think it was if there's pictures that are in the book alongside the text as well, can you sort of use that in the
Yes.
understanding of what's
Oh,
going on?
yes. I mean, that's one of the key. It's one of the key techniques that we use of trying to get the children to decode reading when they don't know. So have a look at the picture. I mean, it's one of the three cues that you use. So the children look at a picture for a cue, what's happening, so they know the word dog might be in there, the word river might be in there. So they're looking for that all the time, and it helps them already gain confidence because they know that dog and river are going to be in there. So yes, using pictorial cues, brilliant. Um, and if a child's really struggling, then you can draw them to. So if the first sentence is the dog ran in the river, so first of all, look at the dog. So what's this here? That's the dog. And what's he running towards there? So he's running to the river. Okay, so let's have a look at that first sentence. D, oh, and then sound it out with him. But again, it can go through the chronology of the text of how you draw the child through the picture. So instead of just looking at a whole picture, you want to draw the child through the picture in the chronological order that's set out in the text, because you're already giving them a map then to succeed.
Fantastic. It's really using the whole book in order to sort
Yeah,
of progress
yeah,
that
absolutely.
child
Yes,
through
'cause
through that reading.
you've literally got the pictorial guide, you've got keywords as a cue. Some of the texts that are there have got keywords highlighted in black, or if it could be a key sound that you're learning in phonics, for instance, you can pick out the OW sounds if that's the phonic you're learning at the time. So again, you've got lots of cues for the children to gain familiarity first, to gain confidence before they're, jump straight into an unknown page. So yes, thanks for that. Was it Jamie? Thanks for that,
Fab.
Jamie.
Yes, it was. Yeah. So we've got another one that's come through sort of on the back of what's been said there. So will the activities for older students reading beginners books be too simple?
No, because you adapt the activities. If it's an older student, if they've got any sort of oral understanding, if they've got any oral competence, by setting them a task that's reliant on word proficiency, not on reading, but on the vocabulary that they have in their brains, then they can still orally answer questions. Activities, again, you can set it towards any particular, so look at a word and finding alternatives for it in a thesaurus or from their own heads. What word means the same as that, and then you can ask them to try and decode that word. So if we're talking about big, you could say, well, what's another word for big? Oh, giant. Okay, well, can we write the word giant down? What does it start with? Does it, again, you get yourself into trouble with phonics with j for giant, but not a g for giant. But again, you can see what I mean. You can take words and extend it at their level from a text which is lower than them, but you can do it in the way that you talk to them, and the activities you set, you extend it to their own oral or their own capabilities as far as their knowledge and understanding goes. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a range of different bands that you can do that to match the reading age to as well. And you can use
The,
your teacher instinct to in
you
order
can
to
use your
adapt
teacher
questions.
instinct, but the biggest thing is those books are so easy to apply up and down. You look at those teacher books and you can pull out a bit that you could do with really younger learners, and you can adapt exactly the same task to an older learner, because those tasks are so flexible, because they understand. Collins understood that these books are not aimed at a 7-year-old, they're aimed at everybody. And those tasks are not aimed at a 7-year-old, those tasks are aimed for everybody. So you're going to have some flexibility to it. So yeah, they're very easy to do in that sense.
Bro, I think we've got time for a couple more. There's another one that's come through. So how fast should children progress through a band before progressing on?
Each to their own. It's a very individual thing. As I said, I've had learners who are amazing readers. They can read anything that you put in front of them, but they don't understand a sausage, nothing, clueless, because they can sight read, but they have no understanding of it. So that child would try and race through everything to get up a band. But if they have no inference of or understanding of what they've read, then your assessment and your questioning of them means that you need to try and build inference skills. So you then need to, instead of reading those books, you need to build more inference and comprehension understanding activities into it before they read. Yes, they've read it, but now we need to look back at what that means. How do we know? What did that character do that? What does that tell you about that character? That question in there from that book about what does Mr. Big sound like? What does his voice sound like? That's a brilliant question because it's not explicit in a book. It's one of those magical things you make up in a book. It's what I find frustrating about films is that now everyone knows what Harry Potter looks like. No one did if they just read it. Everyone's Harry Potter looked different. Everyone's castle looked different. Everyone's character sounded different because that's why a book is unique to you. And that's what inference skills is all about, is that your perception. Whereas just reading it with no understanding of it at all is a fail. So the way that your assessment tools are written in those teacher books allows you to assess the children's progress, and you know when they're ready to go up. If you know they're just sight reading with no understanding, you just carry on building the comprehension skills up before they're able to move on.
Fab. And then I think we've got time for one more. There's one that's just petered in. So we've got, what if there are only a couple lower level readers in a class? How do you conduct guided reading in that way?
Well, it's very, again, situational, because it could be that you have an immense amount of support in your classroom, or it could just be you on your own. And if it's just you on your own as a single teacher, and no TAs or no reading mums or helpers, whatever, we'll go with the worst case scenario. If it's just you, I would look at, if you have lower level readers and you have middle, say, and higher competence, I would set up guided reading with your middle and higher ability groups. With a text level that's suitable. I might even have 3 groups other than this. And if, say, I had 2 lower level readers, I would work with the 2, and I would start to work on those phonic decoding strategies. I would start to work with building sentence structure, depending on what level they're at. And then I would be asking the children to do extension activities. So they'd read, say, page 6 to 8 or something, and then I want you to do these activities that I set out for you. So they're completely independent learning at that stage while you're working one-to-one. You're not asking the children to do activities, because at that stage it's all about decoding and questioning and oral input. But those children, you can set them independent tasks. And the beauty about guided reading is that you've got a group of children who can peer-to-peer support each other. And if somebody can't read a word, then someone else in the group will prompt them. And it's a very respectful thing. When you've got the classroom management thing in place, it's brilliant, because children will allow each other to go around the group and prompt each other if they're struggling. It's a very collective effort. It's lovely.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you very much once again, Christian.
Yeah, very welcome.
And from behalf of everyone here today as well, it's a big thank you. If you've loved this webinar as much as we all have, then do check out the rest of our series via the Collins International Webinar website. And you can find that on the website that's on screen now. Next week, we'll be joined by English and drama expert Chris Green, who will be taking us through some practical hints and tips for how to make the study of Shakespeare an active and relevant experience for all students and teachers. So that's next Wednesday, and that's 10 a.m. and at 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time for both of those. And for now, I hope you have a good day for wherever you are in the world right now, and good evening. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.